Finally forced out. The former Prince, now Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, has officially left Royal Lodge and will live in a home on Sandringham Estate in Norfolk.
The historic gates of Royal Lodge have stood guard over more than 2 centuries of royal history, but absolutely nothing compares to the shocking drama unfolding behind those secure walls right now. A disgraced prince stripped of his titles, a king forced to banish his own brother, and a mansion turned into a major battleground for the biggest Windsor crisis since World War I. Are you ready to find out what is really going on? Because what comes next could easily reshape the monarchy forever. The Royal Lodge dream and how it started. Just think about this for a second. What would you actually do with a 30-room mansion in one of Britain's most exclusive spots? For Prince Andrew, this was not just some fantasy, it was his daily reality for over 20 years. Royal Lodge is not your average property. This Grade 2 listed Georgian masterpiece sits right inside Windsor Great Park, like a crown jewel, featuring 30 beautifully appointed rooms, 7 bedrooms, and a sunken garden that would make any designer weep with absolute envy. Its own private chapel, a luxury swimming pool, an aviary, 6 separate cottages, and even dedicated quarters for his personal protection officers. But this is where things get interesting. This grand mansion carried something far more valuable than mere luxury. It carried legacy. Queen Elizabeth herself grew up inside these walls. Princess Margaret ran through these exact corridors as a child. The Queen Mother called it home until her death back in 2002. When Andrew moved in during 2003, he secured what many called the ultimate bargain of the century, a 75-year lease stretching until June 15th, 2078. The upfront cost was just £1 million. And the annual rent is where your jaw will drop something called a peppercorn rent, if ever demanded. Do you actually know what peppercorn rent means? It is essentially symbolic, completely nominal, almost nothing. Andrew lived in a multi-million-pound mansion for virtually free. His former wife, Sarah Ferguson, joined him in 2008, creating an unusual arrangement. A divorced couple living together in royal splendour, raising many eyebrows but maintaining an arrangement that somehow actually worked. For 2 whole decades this setup seemed untouchable. Andrew had his ironclad lease. He had his prestigious address. He had everything, or so he thought. Then came the scandal that changed everything. Fast forward to 2024. Britain is struggling through a devastating cost of living crisis, where ordinary families are forced to choose between heating and eating. And then the public learns that Prince Andrew, deeply embroiled in scandal and no longer performing royal duties, is living essentially rent-free in a mansion worth millions. Can you imagine the outrage? Can you feel the fury of British taxpayers discovering this cosy arrangement while struggling to pay their own mortgages? The public backlash was immediate. It was fierce, and it was absolutely unrelenting. King Charles had been working behind the scenes for months, trying to persuade his younger brother to downsize and move to something smaller, he suggested. Frogmore Cottage, perhaps, something more appropriate for someone who no longer represents the crown. But Andrew flatly refused. His lease was completely ironclad, he believed. The law protected him. He was not going anywhere. Then came that shocking memoir. Virginia Giuffre's explosive book dropped in 2024 like a bomb, reigniting every terrible headline about Andrew's close association with Jeffrey Epstein. The pressure on King Charles became truly unbearable. The British public demanded immediate action. The Crown's reputation hung in the balance. Something had to give, and on October 30th, 2025, it did. October 30th, 2025 was the day everything shattered. Just picture the scene: Buckingham Palace releasing an extraordinary statement that made massive headlines across the globe in minutes. His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style titles and royal honours of Prince Andrew. Let those heavy words sink in. A reigning monarch stripping his own brother of royal titles. When was the last time something like this actually happened? You would have to go back to 1917, over a century ago, when Prince Charles Edward lost his Duke of Albany title for fighting for Germany during World War I. This was not just completely unprecedented in modern times. The palace statement continued with truly devastating clarity. Prince Andrew will now be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. No more His Royal Highness, no more Duke of York, just Andrew. And then came the ultimate hammer blow. Formal notice has now been served to surrender the lease, and he will move to alternative private accommodation. Andrew's legal protection worthless, the 75-year lease extending to 2078. Terminated, that peppercorn rent arrangement over. But here is what made this sudden announcement truly remarkable. The palace didn't just strip Andrew of his titles, they explicitly aligned themselves with his accusers. The King and Queen want everyone to know that they care deeply about the victims and survivors of all types of abuse. This was the royal family choosing sides, and they were definitely not choosing Andrew's. The 12-month countdown. Andrew was given 12 months to vacate. October 2026 was his hard deadline, but sources close to King Charles revealed something crucial. The King hoped Andrew would leave much sooner, ideally by Easter 2025. Why the sudden urgency? What was really driving Charles to push his brother out so quickly? Sarah Ferguson, who had stood by Andrew through everything, suddenly lost her proud Duchess of York title. Friends reported she was devastated, turning immediately to her daughters Beatrice and Eugenie for support. The collateral damage was rapidly spreading. Questions swirled. Would Andrew be fully compensated for the millions he had invested in renovating Royal Lodge over the years? The Crown Estate launched a formal assessment to determine the property's condition and calculate potential compensation. But as investigators examined Royal Lodge, they discovered something absolutely nobody expected: a massive hoarding crisis, a secret finally revealed. When large removal vans began appearing at Royal Lodge's gates in late 2025, highly disturbing stories started leaking out. Stories that painted a shocking picture of what had been happening inside that mansion for years. Multiple palace insiders used the exact same word, hoarder. Can you imagine? Room after room was piled right to the ceiling with documents, photographs, and personal possessions accumulated over decades, stuffed into every single available space. What should have been a straightforward move had become an archaeological excavation. A close friend told reporters that the clutter at Royal Lodge is turning a simple move into a months-long room-by-room excavation. Another palace source added something even more revealing. Even if Andrew wanted to move tomorrow, he couldn't because of the sheer volume of personal possessions requiring extremely careful sorting. Just think about what this reveals. Here is a man who stepped back from royal duties in 2019, a man who has been increasingly isolated from public life, and he was retreating deep into his private collection of old documents and photographs, desperately clinging to the fading remnants of his former glory. This was far more than simple clutter. It was about his fragile mental state, his coping mechanisms, and a fallen prince unable to let go. The practical fallout was absolutely staggering. King Charles wanted a swift eviction, but the massive hoarding meant the mess would drag on until Andrew's 66th birthday on February 19th, 2026, or even longer. They even had to rent massive storage units just to hold the overflow. Hard decisions loomed over what to keep and what to toss. Every single room required a slow, systematic clean-out. And here is the absolute kicker. The Crown Estate's assessment concluded that Andrew would likely get absolutely zero financial compensation for surrendering his lease early, despite paying £1 million up front and pouring millions more into renovations. The property's current rundown condition simply did not meet lease standards. The sheer dilapidation, the structural decay, and the hoarding damage would completely wipe out any payout he expected. He was losing his home and walking away empty-handed. Welcome to Marsh Farm, the shocking truth behind Andrew's next home. When the news broke about his final destination, royal insiders were stunned. Marsh Farm is a tiny working farm in Wolferton, located roughly 2 miles west of Sandringham House. Left empty for years after the last tenant farmer passed away, it was described by visitors as an incredibly ramshackle and heavily run-down property. Just put this into perspective, Andrew is moving from 30 rooms in a grand Georgian mansion to what friends call a shoebox-sized house, moving from his private chapel to a cottage barely big enough for him alone, leaving behind a swimming pool, a massive aviary, and his beautiful sunken garden to a modest farmhouse that requires heavy renovations just to make it livable. Inside, sources revealed something crucial. He really did not want Marsh Farm. What Andrew actually wanted was Wood Farm Prince Philip's former retirement cottage. It is much larger, far more comfortable and closer to Sandringham House. But here is where things get truly interesting. Wood Farm was blocked specifically because it would put Andrew much too close to the royal family during major holidays like Christmas. See what that means? That 2-mile distance to Marsh Farm was definitely not an accident. It was calculated and highly deliberate, a buffer zone created specifically to keep Andrew isolated from the rest of the royals. Royal commentator Richard Fitzwilliams stated it quite plainly. Keeping Andrew isolated at Sandringham was a strategic way of controlling him. By January 2026, heavy construction crews descended upon Marsh Farm. At least 6 workmen were toiling in the rain, installing security features and making repairs. A 6-foot fence replaced the barbed wire, and high-tech security cameras went up around the property. New surveillance systems were integrated, but the real problems were mounting. The property lacked suitable garaging for Andrew's beloved luxury cars, a major issue that has not gone down well with him. The house was simply not large enough for live-in staff. Instead, King Charles planned to send a cleaner groundsman and cook from Sandringham on an ad hoc basis. Can you even imagine the massive psychological impact Andrew had never managed a household independently? He grew up inside Buckingham Palace with endless staff attending to his every single whim. Now he would be dependent on help coming and going on a strict schedule determined by his brother. One royal insider summarized the situation. One thing is for sure, it is a lot smaller and far less luxurious than Royal Lodge. Another source added that he will not have lived anywhere that small since leaving his old apartment at Buckingham Palace. And back then he had free roam of the building and grounds. Now, behold, the environmental nightmare nobody saw coming. Just when you think this royal drama could not get any crazier, January 2026 brought news that sent massive shockwaves through palace circles. Marsh Farm sits directly on a floodplain. An official flood risk assessment from 2024 for Wolferton Barns, located just metres from Marsh Farm, stated explicitly that the Environment Agency operates a warning system so residents can protect their lives and property from rising waters. This was absolutely not theoretical. This was a real active threat officially recognised by environmental authorities. The report detailed highly specific risks. A failure of the local Wolferton pumping station could easily happen due to a long-term mechanical breakdown or disrupted power supply. If that critical system ever failed, properties like Marsh Farm would be directly threatened by massive flooding. The document concluded that if rising waters put local homes and land at risk of severe flooding, emergency action would have to be taken using temporary pumping equipment. Just let that sink in. Andrew's actual safety from flooding relied on an old pumping station that could break down at any given moment, plus emergency equipment and staff to rescue him if it did fail. And here is the timing that makes this truly remarkable. Storm Chandra battered Britain with fierce winds and torrential rain, just as this news was breaking. King Charles actually had to close the children's play area on the Sandringham estate because the conditions became far too dangerous. Royal watchers noted with alarm that Andrew's massive flooding woes would have drastically worsened as Storm Chandra hit, proving in real time the extreme weather events that could easily destroy his new home. Huge questions exploded. Had the environmental risks been properly assessed before choosing Marsh Farm? Was the king aware of this severe flooding vulnerability? And if he did know why dump a family member into a property with such obvious dangerous risks, when plenty of other safe houses on the Sandringham estate were sitting empty? Some commentators suggested something far darker. Choosing Marsh Farm despite the obvious flood risks might have been entirely deliberate. It could be a quiet strategy to make Andrew's life so uncomfortable that he finally decides to leave the United Kingdom altogether. Now for the security nightmare. Environmental risks were not the only concern here. Top security experts quickly raised major alarms about Marsh Farm's vulnerability. Authorities actually took the extraordinary step of expanding the Sandringham no-fly zone to include Marsh Farm, preventing snooping drones from easily surveilling the property. This drastic move became necessary after drones were spotted over Sandringham in March 2025 during Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's high-profile visit to King Charles. The new legislation protecting Marsh Farm was drafted on September 16, 2025, and officially came into force on September 22nd, weeks before Andrew's titles were formally stripped away. That specific timing is absolutely crucial. It proves that planning for Andrew's quiet move had been underway long before any public announcement. This was never a sudden decision. The official order clearly stated that the Secretary of State has decided it is necessary in the public interest to amend this restricted airspace. A formal warning was issued making it clear that all flights must be restricted around these specific zones to ensure public safety and protect security. However, security specialists openly doubted if Marsh Farm could ever match Royal Lodge, which boasts decades of heavy security infrastructure tucked deep inside the highly protected Windsor Great Park. Marsh Farm sits exactly 2 miles from Sandringham House. With Andrew relocating to this part of Sandringham, local residents point out that his new home is a deeply isolated country estate, which makes quick response times to any major emergency incredibly difficult. Insiders revealed that King Charles will be personally bankrolling Andrew's new housing and security details out of his private pocket, bypassing taxpayers entirely, which is an astronomical ongoing cost. Talk about ironic. In reality, it probably would have been much cheaper to just let Andrew stay at Royal Lodge. Buckingham Palace had already announced that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor would leave Royal Lodge, where tight security was already active early this year. But then came Sarah Ferguson's shocking, unexpected move. Through every single crisis, one partnership remained absolutely rock solid: his close connection with his former wife Sarah Ferguson, who defended him through decades of intense public scandal. She had resided at Royal Lodge since 2008, in what they called a tight-knit friendship, fiercely defending him in public when everyone else walked away. But in January 2026, a shocking exclusive report dropped a massive bombshell. Sarah would not be joining Andrew at Marsh Farm. An insider revealed that both Andrew and Sarah must pack up and vacate by the 25th of January, and though she has supported him through thick and thin, she is finally ready to move on. She will absolutely not be moving with him to his new home on the Sandringham grounds. Having lost her official Duchess of York title and dealing with an unpredictable future of her own, Sarah was leaning heavily on her daughters, Beatrice and Eugenie, for guidance. Reports confirmed she would not be moving in with Princess Beatrice down in the Cotswolds, choosing instead to make her own arrangements near Windsor. This physical split marks the final chapter of their famous post-divorce relationship. They had stayed incredibly close since their 1996 divorce, marking almost 30 full years of deep friendship and co-parenting. Sarah had displayed immense devotion throughout the fallout of the Epstein scandal, but even her legendary loyalty had its breaking point. For Andrew, losing her daily presence is another massive, heartbreaking blow. She was his closest companion, his loudest public defender, and the one person who truly got the heavy burdens of royal life. Isolated at Marsh Farm without her, Andrew will be entirely on his own. The exact timing of Sarah's choice raises a deeply unsettling question. Did she have some inside knowledge about Marsh Farm or Andrew's actual long-term prospects that made her refuse to couple her destiny with his any longer talk about losing absolutely everything? Let us list exactly what is being stripped away from Andrew. Back at Royal Lodge, he had access to a private indoor swimming pool for secluded daily workouts. That is gone. The extensive bird aviary is gone. A gorgeous sunken garden he spent years cultivating is gone. Even his private access to the Royal Chapel of All Saints is gone, which means he must now travel off the property for church services, exposing him directly to photographers and the public. 6 separate guest and staff cottages on the estate are also gone. The dedicated gardeners' quarters and on-site police housing built into the estate are completely gone. His team of live-in servants who catered to his whims day and night are gone, replaced by temporary help from the main Sandringham crew whenever they have time. High-end garages built to house his luxury cars are gone. But most painful of all, his daily independence, personal autonomy and pride are gone too. Friends say reality has finally hit him. The whisper that he absolutely despised the idea of Marsh Farm clearly sums up his resistance. However, that official eviction letter left him with 0 real options. Royal commentators pointed out that the King's decision to banish him to Marsh Farm sends a very loud message to the world. Royal titles and massive privileges require a certain standard of conduct. If you fall short of those standards, the fallout will be fast, painful, and absolutely permanent. An intentional isolation plan. Many royal experts now believe that banishing Andrew to a desolate, lonely farmhouse located more than 2 miles away from Sandringham House was a highly calculated move to isolate and control him. This is the real kicker. It has now been confirmed that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor has officially moved on to the Sandringham grounds. King Charles was sending a crystal-clear signal that his brother's ongoing banishment is geographic, social, and entirely ceremonial. This calculated scheme became incredibly obvious when leaked reports revealed that Andrew had specifically begged to move into Wood Farm, but his request was flatly denied because it sat too close to other royals. This rejection made the king's intentions transparent. Andrew was allowed a roof over his head on the Sandringham estate, but it had to be far enough away to prevent any accidental run-ins with working royals. That 2-mile gap was the absolute minimum buffer zone, but this isolation strategy went far beyond mere physical distance. While Royal Lodge was located in Windsor, where Andrew built social ties over 2 long decades, Marsh Farm sits in a remote countryside region where he has absolutely 0 local connections. This forced relocation to Norfolk also isolates Andrew from his supportive daughters, who both maintain active residences in and around the London area, and have always been his primary emotional pillars. Insiders close to the prince claim he is fully aware of this forced isolation and might ultimately decide to flee the United Kingdom for good. As one close associate revealed, he could easily move over to the Middle East, where he possesses deep-rooted long-term business connections. This dramatic exit strategy is considered highly credible, with royal commentators debating it as a very realistic outcome. Andrew has nurtured deep ties in wealthy nations like Dubai and the UAE connections that could provide a highly comfortable lifestyle where his toxic scandals might not haunt him so relentlessly. The final twist: Marsh Farm might just be temporary housing. In a shocking update in mid-January 2026, whisperings emerged that Marsh Farm is not his forever home, but merely a stepping stone while much larger plans are secretly put in motion behind closed doors. Just let that sink in. After all of this explosive drama, massive expenses, and ongoing renovations, Marsh Farm is just a short-term stop. This shocking revelation raises serious questions about King Charles's true motive. Well-placed sources claim Andrew will occupy some interim housing on the Sandringham grounds while builders continue working on Marsh Farm, or perhaps while they prepare an entirely different royal property. Where exactly this mysterious temporary home is remains completely unknown. One thing is certain: Andrew's chaotic housing nightmare is far from over. More moves and endless uncertainty could easily lie ahead of him in the coming months. Dragging his life from one short-term house to another must feel like a deeply unsettling, chaotic nightmare. Royal insiders believe this temporary label proves King Charles is still undecided on how to deal with his disgraced brother over the long haul. Heavy renovations at Marsh Farm do not look like they are for a temporary stay. Big spending on security fencing, camera systems and upgrades makes zero sense for a brief stay. Or maybe calling Marsh Farm temporary is just a face-saving trick, helping Andrew swallow his pride and accept the move while holding on to hope that things might eventually get better. By calling this farmhouse a temporary home, the palace spin doctors can pitch it as a reasonable stopgap instead of Andrew's ultimate and humiliating final destination. Royal commentators point out that keeping Andrew's housing temporary leaves the door wide open for future shifts if things suddenly change. Like if Andrew's health gets worse, security risks rise, floods make Marsh Farm completely unlivable, or if the public's anger finally boils over. What does this actually boil down to? The real warning here isn't just about severe flooding, lack of garages, or total isolation. It is about the heavy instability that now completely defines Andrew's entire daily life. He has plummeted from a prince with a secure palace and clear duty to a man in temporary housing with his titles entirely stripped and a completely blank, terrifying future, and whose actual presence in the United Kingdom could be up for debate. Marsh Farm represents far more than a smaller home. It symbolises a deeply diminished, fragile status that could shift again without warning. Think about that brutal drop from 30 rooms down to a total shoebox. Going from paying zero rent to relying fully on his brother's charity from royal duties to quiet exile from Prince to just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. Meanwhile, Lisa was digging into those toxic allegations that a woman was sent by Jeffrey Epstein to meet Andrew. And here is the truly explosive part. Whatever Andrew decides to do next could shape the entire royal family's future. Will he accept his banishment quietly fading away at Marsh Farm? Or will he launch a legal battle, sparking a public spectacle that severely damages the crown? Will he sit for bombshell interviews, write a tell-all memoir and spill secrets that rock the palace to its core? Or will he flee the country entirely, slipping far beyond their control? King Charles has taken historic, unprecedented action against his own brother, but the main question remains: has he actually solved the problem or simply delayed a catastrophic explosion? After all, a disgraced royal with absolutely nothing left to lose, cut off, stripped of titles and facing constant floods, is easily the most dangerous kind of threat. Over to you. What part of Andrew's eviction shocks you the most? Is it the flood danger, the hoarding crisis, Sarah Ferguson leaving him, or the temporary housing bombshell? Do you believe King Charles is handling this whole mess correctly, or should he have arranged something else for his disgraced brother? And here is the even bigger question. What do you think Andrew is going to do next? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. This story is far from over and your voice matters. Remember to like this video, share it with other fans of royal family drama, and hit subscribe so you never miss a beat of this unprecedented royal crisis. Because one thing is absolutely certain: the crown has never faced a scandal quite like this, and how it ends could reshape the monarchy forever. Click the next video on your screen for more explosive royal revelations. Trust us, you do not want to miss this.